wear gloves, they get in my way and I don't like them. So the only time I wear gloves is if I'm in a hurry or in the fall. Because in the fall, the bees know that that's their honey, that's their winter stores, and somebody is in there messing with it. And they don't like that. It's protection. So, the sting question. But we are farmers and bees are livestock. So biology. Why is bee biology important? We'll talk about it at a high level. Is it like algebra? Will I ever use it? Absolutely. If you don't understand the biology of the bee and how the colony works, you won't be able to make a lot of decisions. So anytime we do things with bees, I always think of it as kind of honeybee CSI. We see a lot of things, but we don't always know what they mean. We have to piece it together. Different things that we see mean different things at different times. So it's really important to have a sense of how the bee works and why. So you will use it. Falling in love with a bug. I think once you learn a little bit more about them, you will fall much more in love with them. And there's a huge global importance to understanding the bee's biology and its system. Bees have their own structure. They have, we'll talk a little bit about the structure of inside of the hive, but if we as a community could learn to live like bees, this would be an extraordinarily happy place for us. They work very, very well together, so we'll talk about some lessons that the bees provide. So beekeeper rules, the 10-10 rule. Circumstances and goals vary, and so if you ask 10 beekeepers the same question, you will get probably 12 answers, not even 10. For a lot of reasons. We all have philosophical differences. If this beekeeper is raising their bees for honey, they're going to do things differently than this beekeeper who is raising their bees for pollination, than this beekeeper who is doing it just kind of in the backyard because that's what they want to do. And each one of those beekeepers will have different philosophies. How do they treat for pests? What chemicals do they want to use in the hive? How much time do they have? How much time do they want to spend? Do they care if their bees live from year to year? Or do they not care if the bees die over the winter and they're going to buy new bees the following year? So lots of different philosophies. And the different time of the year makes a big difference. So that's why the answers will vary. And then beekeepers' experience varies dramatically. Some beekeeping do's and don'ts. We talked about philosophies, helping to find yours. Always ask questions. Why? Why would I do that? When would I do that? Why wouldn't I do that? What would I consider in doing that? Because as you ask those deepening questions, you'll understand why you got the answer that you got. As a matter of fact, when you're starting out with beekeeping, if you ask a question and get an answer back without someone asking you clarifying questions, stop. Don't listen to that answer. Go back and ask some more questions. What else should I be asking you? And one of the questions I ask beekeepers when I was starting, and what I encourage other people to do, is this someone whose bees live year over year? Or is this someone whose bees die over the winter and they buy new bees every year? Because I'm not into paying a lot of money for bugs every year. I want a sustainable apiary. That's what most of us want. We don't want to have the expense. We don't want bees are trucked up from Georgia every year. We don't want bees that are under that stress that truck up from Georgia every year and bring every kind of different disease and pest from those, and it's not just Georgia, it's all over. So you really want to talk to somebody who does this and does it well. You'll understand styles and goals. Experts, I'll tell you what, there are a million experts on the internet. They are amazing. Just ask them. They'll tell you. The challenge with the internet, the beauty of the internet is you get a lot of great information, you get a lot of great video, a lot of pictures. The challenge with the internet is, especially when you're new, it's very difficult to evaluate the validity of the person or the information. Just because they sound confident, including me, just because they sound confident does not necessarily mean that they know it all or that they're giving you the right answer. And again, a lot of what works in Georgia and California is not going to work in New Hampshire. It doesn't get down to negative 15 degrees, and we certainly don't have a winter that starts out in November and doesn't seem to end until June in Georgia. So a lot of different circumstances. So the geographical awareness is very important. Can we always encourage people to keep learning? So with the keep learning, what we find is bee schools are fabulous. They tend to run 6 to 8 weeks. They're offered in all 7 clubs across the state. There are also some private folks that will give lessons as well. But you can't teach anything more than the surface in those kinds of classes. So coming to beekeeper meetings is absolutely vital because you'll never remember everything that was taught in class. I'm amazed at the number of people who are attentive, taking notes in class, who will ask the same question 3 weeks later that we went over 3 weeks ago, and it's not because they aren't listening or they aren't great, it's because of so much information, and a lot of it is seasonal. So we don't even teach anything about wintering. We don't even teach anything about fall. By the way, fall for the bees starts August 1st. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then numbers. Why doesn't it add up? We'll talk a little bit about what that means. So time commitment. A lot of people say, well, how much time do I have to put in? Well, that depends upon what you want to get out of it. So, am I a beekeeper or a bee haver? Bee havers put bees in a box. They get too busy. They're well-intentioned, but life gets busy. The world turns on its side, circumstances happen. Or they really just don't want to do a lot with them, or they get fearful. And sometimes people, if they haven't handled bees before, once they get bees and they install them, get really freaked out by it and say, you know, I'm not sure, they'll be fine by themselves. Sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. That's a bee haver. Bee havers lose their bees and the bees die. They didn't pre-1980. We had some changes in 1980 when varroa mites or varroa destructors hit the US. That changed the landscape of beekeeping forever. Pre-1980, you could stick the bees in a box, put them in a field, come back in the fall, harvest honey, the bees lived the winter, boom, boom, we were done. 1980 changed it all for us. So at this point, you know, you need to become a beekeeper. So seasonally, it will make a difference. In January, the bees are inside the box. They have detached their wings from their wing muscles, and they're shivering their wing muscles. At about 50 degrees, they cluster together, so they all snuggle in as physically tight as they can get with the queen at the center, and they shiver. They shiver those wing muscles to generate heat, and they keep it about 50 degrees inside the center of that colony, all winter long, even when it's negative 15 outside. The bees on the outside of that cluster are cooler, but the bees on the inside are about 50. So January, we're not doing a lot with our bees. What we may be doing is building equipment, studying, taking some classes. So there's very little time investment during that time, and there's really no time with the bees. We do take a quick peek a couple of times in January to make sure the bees still have enough food, and we add a solid food fondant, like cake fondant, is what we add for them to give them some carbohydrate and some pollen patties, which are their protein. But that's a quick peek, and we're in and out. Very little time commitment. February starts to be a little bit more of a time commitment, because what happens in just after the 1st of January, as the sun starts to come longer, our days start to get longer, they raise the very center of that cluster up to 95 degrees by the first week in January, so that the queen can start to lay more eggs, because the nursery, or the brood chamber where the eggs are, needs to be 95 to sustain eggs. So we're not doing a whole lot, but the bees have started to do a whole lot. And because it's so cold, they start in a very, very small cluster, and as the days get longer, they start to expand that. Because bees only live so long. Winter bees live longer than summer bees, but those winter bees are going to die off, and if the queen doesn't replace them with new bees, there won't be enough bees in order to sustain the colony. So they know that. So in February, they've started to grow a little bit inside there. So we're really checking them now to make sure they have enough food. We want to make sure that we keep them to get into the spring. Time commitment, again, you're lifting up the lid, you're looking in real quick. It's maybe 10 minutes at the hive itself. The time in the winter months is typically spent, again, building equipment, going to classes, about reading, those kinds of things. March, continues a little bit further. By the time we get to mid-March, we're still not doing much other than those quick peaks, but we're doing them more frequently. So it might be once a week or once every couple of weeks. As we get into April and May, now we start to get into the much busier time. So April and May is what we consider swarm season. That's when, if we did a really good job as beekeepers, and the bees have lots and lots of food in there, and they've started to grow the brood nest. When the brood nest gets too crowded, they may want to leave. They may want to up and book out of there. So we're really getting in, and again, once every 2 weeks, but we're doing a little bit deeper dive. What's really going on inside the colony. So you have, I don't know, hour, a month in there, not too long. June, July, August, September, that's when, as brand new beekeepers, we recommend that you go in your hive no more than once a week, but at least once a week if you can. If you have had bees for a while and are familiar with them, I go into my colonies once every 3 weeks during the summer. So that's all I go in. But for a new beekeeper, you have no idea what you're looking at, and you are not going to learn it from a book. You're going to have to get used to handling the bees. You're going to have to get used to seeing what you see. So it doesn't have to be a long time. I would say a good estimate for a new beekeeper is 1 hour per colony. So it may take you longer, it may take you less, but an hour per colony. And then as we get into August and September, we're harvesting, so about the same time. October, a little bit less. By November, the bees are pretty well shut down for the winter, and you're not doing a whole lot with them. You're back to, am I studying, am I cleaning up my equipment? So from a time standpoint, it's not an enormous amount of time. It really isn't, but it's important time that's spent. The language of bees. All right, we'll talk a little bit about the hive. The hive is the bee's house. It's the physical structure that they live in. You can build it, you can buy it. You can buy it all painted. Langstroth is the last name of the inventor of the modern hive that you see, the white box that's out there. It's multiple boxes, and it has one colony in it. A colony is the family of bees. A skep are the old woven baskets that you see typically, as you know, in a lot of the pictures. Warray is a different type of hive, and a top bar is a very long hive. It's not vertical, it's a horizontal hive. Colony, that's the family of bees in the hive. When you buy your bees, initially, if you buy bees in a package, they come with 1 queen and about 10,000 bees. By now, the beehives should be up to between 60 and 80,000 bees in a colony to be strong enough. A frame is the internal structure on which the bees draw out honeycomb or the wax to rear their brood, store honey, pollen, and water. It's required by law now that you have the ability to pull out frames so that they can be inspected. And that's one of the things that has happened with diseases and pests, is we have to be able to inspect those colonies for a couple reasons. One, we need to make sure they're strong. Or I should back up, we need to have the ability to inspect them. We need to be sure they're strong, we need to be able to quickly identify any diseases or pests. But also, I want to make sure your apiary is safe, because our bees are going to visit the same flower. And I really don't want whatever you've got, if it's not good, coming to mine, and vice versa. In the state of New Hampshire, we have a bee inspector. His name is Ben Chadwick of Spring Fever Farm up in Alton, New Hampshire. He and his wife, Ben, are amazing, wonderful people that have been doing this for a very long time. They make all kinds of products from the hive. And in the state of New Hampshire, the inspectors are hired round about mid-March, and they're laid off round about mid-September. In the state of New Hampshire, there's no mandatory requirement for registering your hives, although we encourage people to do so for a lot of reasons. One being, if your town is going to spray any kind of pesticide and you are registered, they are required to notify you by registered mail so that you can take some action. Local people are not required to notify anyone under any circumstances. So your neighbor can spray their property with whatever it is that they decide to. They can hire blah, blah, blah pest service to come in. But on a state level, if it's going to be your town, they are required to notify. Yes?
At one of the home shows or something like that, I talked to a guy about spraying for mosquitoes, and one thing he told me is that they couldn't spray within, I think he said 2 miles of a beehive. And I said, wow, that's a big space. How do you even know? He says, well, it's your responsibility to find out. And so I'm surprised that an owner can do that.
Absolutely. I don't know what he's talking about. Their company may have that policy, but it's not a requirement at all. Nor are there mandatory inspections. Some states allows for surprise inspections. The bee inspector shows up in your backyard and you cannot stop them from coming in. The free or die state, you know?
But why would you want to stop from looking at your hive?
People are private. It's my property, it's my hive. I don't want the tax collector showing up to inspect my property. I don't want someone come in, we've heard horror stories of inspectors who will come out and, they're people too. So you hear things, vendettas, and, they try to shut one down because they're trying to help the other one, and I don't know, it's just, I like New Hampshire.
Bee mafia.
Exactly, the bee mafia. Combs or cells are the 6-sided wax cells that they build out on the frame. So the frame is a flat surface, and the bees build out comb on it in which to put all of the other, the honey, the pollen, the water in. In the wild, they don't have a frame, so they create their own frame or their own sheet. If you were to put in blank pieces of, frame in there, they would do the same in your hive too. But Langsdorff designed frames for us so that they had some stability so that we can move them out and move them around and really inspect them. Inside a hollow tree, nobody's going in, pulling out the honeycomb and looking at it, so it doesn't have to be inspected, and we're not going to manipulate it. There's 3,500 cells per side, per deep frame, and 2,310 per medium frame. So these boxes come in different heights. A deep is about this tall. A medium is about this tall, and a shallow is about that tall. Why not have just one? Well, the deep boxes are what we allow the bees to put their brood in and their honey. And then the mediums or shallows, we put our honey in. So sometimes it's an easy way to differentiate. Is this the bee's box, or is this mine? The other thing is, if you have ever tried to lift a 10-frame deep box, they go about 85, 90 pounds once the bees are all in there. And if there are two, and to inspect them, you have to take one off to get in there, they're heavy. The last thing you want to do is have their boxes, and then one for my honey, and I had a beekeeper who did this, one for honey. At this point, I defy most guys to lift that easily and manipulate it, and now you've got a lot of bees and bugs in there too. So different sizes for different purposes. Anatomy. I won't bore you with this, but I do want to touch on it briefly. The bee's anatomy is just absolutely amazing. They have 6 legs. Their legs are used for a variety of different things. The front legs that you see have antenna cleaners on them. The bee's antennas are used to smell and to feel. Remember, it's pitch black inside that hive, and yet they work 24 hours a day and they do not sleep. So they're constantly moving around, and if there's 60 or 80,000 of them, can you imagine if we shut off the lights and even just the few of us started walking around in here trying to move chairs and get to the food table? It probably wouldn't be very pretty. So they have a lot of senses to help them navigate. They have antenna cleaners on there, and in the very front they have what looks like a claw. It helps them manipulate. The center legs also have a claw, and those claws are used to shape wax. They're actually used to grab and move things as well. There's such a thing as an undertaker bee. All the bees have jobs, and as they get older, they go from job to job. And undertaker bees actually use their claws to drag dead bees or dying bees from the hive, because they actually take their dead and throw them out the front door. And on the back legs, which I think are the most fascinating ones, they have some rakes and combs at the end, because when a honeybee gets inside a flower, they are going to roll around in the pollen, and get covered in it, but they then have to take this comb, which looks very much under a magnifying glass like the comb you and I would use to comb our hair, and they go ahead and groom themselves. Kind of picture a cat, and it will help. And what they do is they take it and they stuff it into pollen baskets, which are on the back of their legs, and then there's a pollen press, so like the leg is backward, it packs it in there so they end up with a packet of pollen on the back of each leg, and that's how they carry the pollen from the flower into the hive. Their head has the two antennae, and we talked about those for a moment. The bee has 5 eyes. They have 2 compound eyes, which are the ones that we tend to see. It's the ones that they see in highlight situations. They let them see out in the daylight, and that's their primary eyes. And then they have 3 ocelli, which are small eyes, which you really can't see. They're in a triangular form on the shape on the top of their head. They use those inside the hive. In addition, drones' eyes are shaped a little bit differently, and they use those because as they're out looking for a virgin queen to mate with, they need to have much larger eyes because they fly a little bit lower so that they have a better angle. Body hair, the bee's entire body is covered with body hair, and that's to pick up pollen. It's designed specifically to get in and to pollinate. A bee has 2 sets of wings, and those wings I mentioned earlier when we were talking about winter. They can detach from the muscles. Now they stay attached to the bee, but they can detach their wing muscles from those wings and shiver them in order to generate heat. They also will take their wings and flap them to do a variety of different things, not just fly. The bee's mouth, they have a triangular shaped head and a mouth with a mandible that looks scary when you look at it under a microscope, but not so much when you look at it in real life. They would use that to chew wax. They also use that to eat and to help them digest and pull in pollen. And they use that primarily to shape the wax. Yes?
Can bees bite?
Bees can bite. They don't typically, and we're much more concerned about the other end, but they can bite.
Have you ever gotten bitten, or is it any different than a sting?
I don't know if I've ever gotten bitten. That's a great question. If I have, I didn't know it.
Oh, okay.
And I confused it with being stung, maybe. Bees will bite other bees. So if things aren't going well, they will bite other bees. Wasps and hornets, on the other hand, are carnivores. They do bite. They sting and bite, and it is not pretty. I know, I happened to get stung twice the other day. I sat in my aviary, I had a chair with a lovely cushion on it. And it was a beautiful afternoon, and I just sat down for a minute to watch the bees, and my husband came in, not with his suit on, which is very unusual, sat down in the chair next to me, and all of a sudden, it got a little nutty in the apiary. There were a lot of insects around us. Bees don't want anything to do with us. So they were flying back and forth, but all of a sudden, and I looked over and just said to him, could you get up slowly and walk out of the aviary? And he said, why? I said, just don't ask me any questions, just go. He really doesn't like to get stung. And what had happened was there was a hornet's nest right underneath the chair he was sitting in. It was about that big, one of those paper wasp nests. He got out unscathed. I took 2 stings. He had long pants on, I had shorts on, so go figure. The proboscis is their tongue. It looks like, you know, at New Year's Eve parties when you have those blowers that when they roll out, that's exactly what they look like. It's a straw. It's used to get in and collect nectar inside a flower and water, which they actually take and bring and put in a honey stomach. So they have 2 stomachs, a digestive stomach for what they eat, and they have a honey stomach. And the honey stomach is absolutely separate. Think of a camelback, except it's on the bee's front. So that's how they carry liquids back and forth to the hive. Their abdomen is where the rest of their internal guts are, and their thorax is the hard center part of their body, which is right here. And bees have an exoskeleton. So their skeleton is on the outside, not on the inside. So picture the bee's head. You can see the eyes on either side. This is a female bee. It's a worker bee. It's a pretty good picture that will show the antenna. It also shows the proboscis a bit and the hair on the bee's head. Another picture of the bee's mandible, close up, that looks a little scary. Nothing to be frightened of. And And then this is an example of the bee's proboscis, and that's either water or a nectar or some spilled honey that's on that person's hand. So the bee is sitting there very nicely slurping it up, getting ready to take it to where they need to go. I won't spend much time here, other than inside the skeleton is where they have all of their intestines, the poison, if we look at the stinger end, so the stinger stays in retracted until they feel the need to sting, or they sense that they might want to sting, and then they kind of put it in the ready position. And there's a poison sac attached to it. Now the stinger on a honeybee has a barb on the end, like most of our fish hooks. So as soon as that bee puts their stinger into you and goes to pull away, that barb holds it. So as the bee flies away, the venom sac and part of their abdomen stays attached to it. So the honeybee will die. And you can tell you've been stung by a honeybee versus any other kind of bee because you will see that venom sac and you'll see the stinger. If you don't see a stinger, it's not likely it was a honeybee that you were stung by. It's some other stinging insect. They can only sting once, whereas a lot of the other insects can sting multiple times. I don't like that we call it a poison sac. It's a venom sac, and venom is used for a lot of good things. This picture just happened to call it a poison sac. But the biggest thing to remember when you get stung by a honeybee or any other kind of bee is if you take that venom sac which is attached, and you then do this to pull it out, you have just squeezed all of that venom into your body. So if you take a fingernail, a credit card, a hive tool, anything flat, and just scrape it across, you might leave a teeny tiny bit of the stinger in your arm, but you will not have injected all of that venom in there. So those people who use the venom for different purposes would leave that venom sac there for whatever length of time is appropriate based on what they're doing, because they want that venom to go in. You and I, if we're stung out there, we want to take that off. My grandson always says, ow, he steps on him in the clover, and he'll say, it's a splinter. It's not a splinter, let's go get that out. Let's take it out right now. Bees also breathe through air sacs on the sides of their body. They don't breathe through their mouth parts. So they breathe through something called spiracles, which are on the side of their body. So they don't fly in the rain. They stay nice and home. Let's talk about the bees in there. So there are three castes of bees: a queen, a drone, and a worker. A queen is female. She has mature ovaries. She goes out on some mating flights, and when she comes, once a queen has emerged, she within the first 4 or 5 days will take off out of the hive somewhere between 2 and 3 times over the course of a couple of days. We hope that she is, well, I won't give it a name given I don't know any of you, but we hope that she likes to mate a lot, because we want her to mate with as many drones as possible, because what happens is she takes the sperm and it's stored in her spermatheca, which is a separate part of her body, and she will never leave the hive again. So we want to make sure that she has as much genetic variety as possible. So the more drones she mates with, the better luck we will have in that regard. Her primary job is to reproduce. Once she returns to the hive, she starts to lay eggs, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 a day. She doesn't clean herself, she doesn't feed herself, she does not do anything. She defecates in the hive, she's the only bee that does that, and the worker bees take it out. They feed her, they groom her. Her job is to stick her head inside a cell, determine if it's large enough, or the size. There are 2 sizes of cells. A small cell is going to get a fertilized egg, so she'll drop her abdomen in. Her abdomen will go all the way to the bottom of the cell. She'll drop an egg, a little bit of sperm, it's fertilized, and off she'll go. If it's a bigger cell, she's just going to drop an egg without sperm. And we want her to lay as many as possible, especially in this part of the country. We have a very short laying cycle, so we don't have a lot of time. By June 21st, the queen has laid the most number of eggs in a day that she's going to lay, because daylight starts diminishing. And so she's going to start laying less and less and less. So So she works by length of day, meaning length of daylight in a day, not necessarily by cold. She has that long abdomen. It's actually longer than her wings. It's one of the ways you can tell her in a hive. She has a shiny thorax. She does not pollinate, so she doesn't need as many hairs on her body. So they slow her down, so they're not on there. And she kind of sachets as she moves through the hive. If you're looking at her, she knows she's all that in a bag of chips. She's just going to move really, really beautifully in that hive. That's a picture of a queen bee. You'll notice her wings come about to the middle of her abdomen, and she is much, much longer. A little bit washed out here. Queens come from there are different types of bees. This happens to be a Russian queen. They're bred in Russia. We now breed them here. They have some specific traits that we like, and some of us have Russians. I actually have about a half dozen Russian colonies. They can be a bit more aggressive to maintain and to manage, and they tend to have certain characteristics where they like to swarm, but they overwinter in smaller colonies, and they're prolific honey gatherers. So if you can handle them and know what you're doing, they're a pretty good bee to have. So they're darker bees, and if you'll notice, the bees that are around her, their wings go almost all the way to the end of their abdomen. And this is her retinue. So these are the bees, they are just waiting to guide her, to clean her, to groom her, to feed her. Reproduction, we talked about the virgin queen. We want her to mate with anywhere between 8 to 20 drones over a few days and a couple of flights. Drones congregate in certain areas called drone congregation yards. I call them the local bar. And it's somewhere within a 5-mile radius. Bees typically fly about 2 miles to forage. The queen will fly further than that because inherently she knows she does not want to mate with any of her brothers. So they fly further away to go to the drone congregation yards. Don't ask me where they know this or how they know it, but they do. Once a drone mates with a female, it will die. So that's kind of just the way that goes. There's another picture of a queen. Drones, unfertilized eggs, males, they're haploids. They have no father, but a grandfather. Their almost only job is to mate with virgin queens. They hang out in drone congregation yards. Potentially, some people believe that they might actually be used for a heat bank as well, because remember we said it's going to be about 95 degrees inside for the brood. There are some people that believe that they actually snuggle inside some of the cells to try to generate some heat. I have no idea. I don't live inside a hive. But the other thing they do is they are magnets for mites. So mites are, the Varroa destructor is a mite that, we all live with mites, right? There are dust mites, there are all kinds of mites. We don't want to think about the mites that are on our body right now, or in our house, but we all live very nicely with mites as much as we don't want to. Mites have lived with bees for quite some time. What happens is, because drones, when they're in the cell, take longer to mature, they give off a different pheromone, different smell, and the mites are attracted to that because they can multiply more times once that cell is capped than they can in the other bees. So again, how they know this, I have no idea. But what we do is we actually will take a very special frame, which is pressed with a little bit larger cell, and put that in the hive to attract the queen to lay unfertilized eggs, which will become drones in that cell. Once they're covered, we actually pull that out, brush off the bees, freeze it, killing the drones that are in it, because I don't need any drones. I have a mated queen. They're not going to do me any good. And it'll kill the mites. 48 hours later, I can scratch the cappings off that, throw it back in, and the bees will pull out all the dead drones and the dead mites, and the queen will start laying again. So it's one of the integrated pest management treatments we as beekeepers use to not have to use chemicals. So we use the bees' biology to their benefit and our benefit. However, drones are the quintessential couch potato. They do nothing but eat up the stores. They don't forage, they don't bring back food, they don't clean the hut, they do not, they can't even let themselves out of their own cell when they emerge, they need help from the workers. So in the fall, around about the third week of August into the first week of September, there's a massacre. It looks like I'll answer your question in a second, I didn't want to ignore you. It looks like a massacre in front of the hive, and you'll think something's wrong. And what has happened is the workers have now decided that they're done bringing things in, or close to done, and all of these drones are going to do nothing but consume what they've worked for. So they ceremoniously uncap the larva, kill the drones, and throw them out the front door. Gone. So, you had a question?
So unfertilized eggs can hatch and become drones?
They do. Unfertilized eggs hatch as drones.
Oh, okay.
Drones don't have stingers either.
So can they be female as well, or are they only male?
Only male.
Okay.
Drones are only, and they're the only male in the hive. The only males in the hive, their job really is to mate with the queen, and then we use them, we take their properties and use them to attract mites. So they're discarded in the fall, and they have much larger eyes, a very big thorax, no stinger twice, because it's kind of cool to bring a bunch of drones around and let them go. It's a beekeeper gag. I know, a little silly. These are drones. So the ones that you see, right here. They sound like B-52 bombers. They're noisy, they're loud, they're much fatter. You'll notice that if you take a look at this is a worker bee. Its wings are about the length of its abdomen. I'm sorry, that's a drone. How can I tell? The eyes are right on top of their head. Right side, but they almost touch. They're right side by side.
So there's all drones in that picture.
Just about all drones in that picture. Yep. What's interesting is if you take a look here, these are drones that are starting to emerge. So they're starting to chew out